Russia. It would have been brilliant to see him deliver it, though, wouldn't it? Your Majesty, I have a poem. Shall I read it? Oh, yes. There was a young monarch from Prussia whose wife didn't want him to touch her, but despite all his pleading, the years of inbreeding make him look like a wrestler from Russia. Marx then went to Cologne to edit a liberal newspaper, and soon after he married Jenny, and within a few years they'd already had 4 children, but the paper that he was editing was shut down by the authorities, so they had to move to Paris. While there, they were visited by Friedrich Engels, who arrived at similar conclusions to Marx, and they formed a partnership that carried on for the rest of their lives. They helped form the Communist League, and together they wrote the Communist Manifesto. It was only a pamphlet about 30 pages long, but has possibly the most famous first and last lines of any book. It starts,
"There is a spectre haunting Europe. It is the spectre of communism."
Though in the first English edition, this was translated as,
"A frightful hobgoblin is stalking throughout Europe."
That's why it sold so many copies. People thought it was a book of fairy stories. Maybe it started a trend, the Labour theory of value and the beanstalk. But all the way through the Communist Manifesto are lines that must have seemed as shocking at the time as they were baffling. For example,
"Society is more and more splitting into 2 great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat."
Proletariat meant specifically workers in factories and large workplaces, and bourgeoisie meant the people who owned and ran those workplaces. Now, it's often claimed that the Communist Manifesto was all right for its time when people worked in factories, but it's out of date now as there are a few manual workers left. But Marx insisted that a merchant's clerk was as much a part of the working class as a factory worker, because offices are just as boring and unpleasant as a factory, aren't they? They're just not so dramatically working class, that's all, because no one ever shouts, "Quick, run, the photocopier's collapsing in on us!" But silliest of all are these people who go, "It's all you posh middle-class southerners what's got all money." Like there's no working class in the south. In which case, what do we say when the drains are busted? Do we go, "Oh dear, what a pong, better ring a northerner"? And then there's these other definitions, such as "you must be middle class, you've got a mortgage." This doesn't make any sense, because in some ways a mortgage is worse than rent, because back in the 30s, a family would see the rent man coming up the path, and then everyone would crawl behind the settee. Shh, wait till he's gone, wait till he's gone. Shh. Right, he's gone. Simple. But when your monthly statement comes through from the Halifax, you can't get away without paying by ringing them up, going through 8 recorded messages and 20 minutes of Celine Dion, and then going, "I'm not in." In fact, Marx and Engels were predicting the rise of industry. At the time that they wrote the Communist Manifesto, outside Britain, there were a few factories in Belgium, a few in towns such as Lyon, a few more in Germany and America, and that was it. And yet they wrote,
"The bourgeoisie compels all nations to adopt the bourgeois mode of production."
Which must have seemed ridiculous at the time, that places like Malaysia or Central America could one day become locked into an international system. But now you could go to a shopping centre in Kuala Lumpur or Guatemala and there would almost certainly be a body shop, Our Price, Clinton Cards, fake Irish pub, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, a bloke in a thick green pullover trying to recruit you into the AA, and a crowd of Peruvian blokes in ponchos playing "I Just Called to Say I Love You" on the phone. And the Communist Manifesto ends with the rallying cry,
"Workers of all countries unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains."
Only a few hundred copies of the Communist Manifesto had even been printed, and barely anyone had read it when revolution broke out in France and Germany, and Marx formed a committee which advocated the collection of taxes should be
resisted everywhere and in every way.
The revolutions were defeated, after which the French and Prussian states became paranoid about any oppositionists. A police sergeant arrived at Marx's house to tell him he was banished from Paris, so the family fled to London. And following these defeats, the communist movement went into decline, and Marx and Engels were left isolated. Marx wrote to Engels,
"I am pleased with the isolation in which we now find ourselves. At last we have an opportunity to show we have no need of any popularity or support whatsoever."
And Marx and Engels seemed to go out of their way to keep this wish. About their supporters in Germany, Marx wrote,
"Aren't they miserable slack dogs? No reaction, no energy in them. They're just a lot of old women."
Later, about his longtime friend and supporter, the poet Ferdinand Freiligrath, he wrote to Engels,
"Between you and me, he's a turd."
And Marx was brilliant at being rude. During one of his lectures, someone shouted,
"Under socialism, who would polish the shoes?"
So Marx shouted back, "You would." The isolation eventually affected Marx financially. He depended on handouts from Engels, who had gone to work at his father's factory in Manchester, but he was permanently broke. A Prussian spy who was following him wrote a report about his flat.
Everything is broken, battered and torn, finger-thick dust everywhere. On one table are teacups with dirty rims, dirty spoons, tobacco ash, all kinds of trash that a junk dealer would be ashamed of. If you sit down, you risk a pair of trousers.
That is bad when the spy obviously feels the urge to tidy up. And then they fell behind with the rent. So according to Jenny...
2 bailiffs entered, impounded all my few possessions, beds, linen, even the cradle of my poor child, and the best toys of my girls, who wept bitter tears.
And the conditions led to Marx developing a liver complaint, which resulted in him being covered in boils. In a letter to Engels, he wrote...
Another carbuncle has erupted, right under the place to which Goethe refers. I cannot walk, nor stand, nor sit, and lying down is damned difficult. And you should be informed that a new furuncle has broken out on my back.
Must have been quite an experience getting a letter from Marx. As you were opening it, you wouldn't be sure whether it was going to be a thesis on dialectics or a moan about boils on his arse. Marx could be a typical lad. One night he went up Tottenham Court Road with 2 mates having a glass of beer in each of the 18 pubs. And on the way home, according to his friend Liebknecht,
Marx and I picked up some stones and smashed 4 or 5 street lamps until a policeman gave the signal to his colleagues on the beat, when Marx showed an agility I could not have attributed to him.
So you get loads of people now who argue about what Marx would say if he was here today. But there you are, what he would probably say would be, "I'll have a doner with chilli sauce. Extra hot. Oh, hang on, I've lost my wallet." At one point he was sufficiently boil-free while Jenny was pregnant and out of town to sleep with a maid, Helen de Muth, and get her pregnant as well. And though Jenny was told the truth, the rest of the family was spared embarrassment by Engels, who gallantly took the rap for fathering the child. So the personal lives of the Marx household veered into every type of misery. Sometimes Marx couldn't even leave the house because his clothes had all been pawned. And then they had a child who died soon after she was born, and they couldn't afford a coffin. Jenny wrote,
I ran to a French refugee who lived nearby. He showed the greatest sympathy and gave me £2. With these, we bought the little coffin in which my poor child now slumbers in peace.
All the while, Marx kept working on the book that would explain the workings of capitalism, as he saw it, Capital, or Das Kapital, as it's better known, for some bloody reason. No one refers to Mao's little red book as hiya, hiya, do they? Much of Capital is just rage about the unfairness around him. There's a section on the plight of bakers working 21-hour shifts in temperatures of 90 degrees. But he also tries to show how this is a consequence of the economic system. In previous class societies, he says, exploitation has been obvious. But with capitalism, there's a pretence of fairness. The employer provides the workplace and the tools, and the worker provides the labour. The value of the commodities that the worker has made, said Marx, comes from the labour invested in them, and the worker receives only a fraction of that value. Which is why someone can work in a sweatshop and their wages aren't enough to buy a single pair of the trainers they've spent all week making. And then we end up with a society in which nothing is made unless it can yield a profit. Because when a capitalist invests, he doesn't care what he's making as long as it's profitable. When they have these mergers, the head of the multinational doesn't announce at a shareholders' meeting,
The Trust decided to launch a takeover bid for Weetabix Holdings Limited because we love Weetabix. Because it's crumbly and crispy and you get a free plastic dinosaur in every pack.
But Marx said it gets worse. Because capitalists are in competition with each other, they're compelled to try and lengthen the working day and boost productivity to get ahead of their rivals. When I was a kid, all the predictions were that by the year 2000 we'd all be working 1 hour a day and the rest of the time wandering around dressed in aluminium foil. But instead, the working week is now longer than it's been for 80 years. New technology has increased the workload. Mobile phones and laptops mean people are expected to work on the way to work. Even in the cotton mills, the workers didn't have to take a power loom home with them in the evening. Carry on weaving down the street. And all the time, he argued, capitalists are driven to behave like this, otherwise they fall behind.